All right, hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the first episode of The Catholic Show. It's going to be a show that's going to hopefully equip you, inspire you to go out and to live a remarkable life for Christ. And to tell you the truth, I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. This is the first episode. This is the first time that I'm doing all of this, and it's going to take me a while to get settled in and to figure out exactly what this is going to look like. But it's December 1st, and I set a goal for myself. I said I need to publish something on December 1st. I need to start, putting things out there to help people. And specifically, a main reason why I want to do this show, this podcast, it's also going to be on YouTube and all these things. But a main reason that I want to do that is because I have children. And I want to have a conversation with them in the future when they're old enough to watch this. So I have 3 small children right now, and my wife and I are always talking about what are we going to do to raise holy children, to raise saints. And the world is so dark. There's so many ways they can go off course and off track and fall into sin here or fall into sin there. And they're going to fall into sin, and they're going to be, trapped in certain ways, I'm sure, spiritually, but there's a way out. And the way out is to let in the way, the truth, and the light of Jesus Christ. And so that's what I want to do. I want to give them a resource that they can look at 5, 10, 20, 40 years in the future. Maybe I won't even be alive at that point, but I want to give them some way to navigate what I see as a world that is crumbling around us. And I know that's not a cheery thing to talk about, and I know some Catholics are like, well, just talk about the beauty of the faith and just talk about the good things that are going on in the world. And while there's some merit to that, we should not dwell on the negative, right? I think it was John Sr. who said something to the effect of, you shouldn't perseverate on the negative because that gives the devil too much respect. And I think some of that's true, but we're also at war. We're at war, and raising kids is a timed event with an eternal consequence. I don't know who said that, but it's a good one, I think. Raising kids is a timed event with an eternal consequence. And so again, I'm making this podcast, this YouTube channel, for you, whoever you are. I hope you find value in it. I hope you find encouragement in it. And I hope you become the saint that you're created to be. But I also hope that my children and my family become the saints that they were created to be. And there's a way in which you can look at the world and you can be very overwhelmed by everything. And I think this is a problem in the church, and I think this is something worth addressing on later episodes. But there's a way in which we can watch the news and we can hear what's going on, over there, and we can hear what's going on over there, and we can hear, what's taking place in China or in South Africa or in Antarctica. I mean, you can get news and get updates from everywhere in the world. And I don't, as much as I do care about those things, as much as we ought to pray for those things, I have a sphere of influence that I need to directly take care of, and that's my family. And so if I can change my family, if I can lead them to Christ, if I can keep them journeying towards Christ, then the hope would be that they can radiate outward to their spheres of influence and then their spheres of influence. And I know the term spiritual multiplication has been thrown around, but I don't even want to go there. I don't even want to think about that, because right now I know, as a father, as a husband, as a son, I have a lot of work to do just to reach the people that are around me, that are in my sphere of influence. And so that's really what this podcast is about. That's what this YouTube channel is about. It's just, inspiring whoever's willing to watch it. But I think that my family will be willing to watch it at some point. So, and I hope that, again, that they become the saints that God has created them to be. And that's really our family prayer. I hope you have a family prayer. I hope you've taken time to figure out a prayer that you can all say in common. My family prayer my wife and I decided was, your grace upon us, O Lord, that we become the saints that you've created us to be. And I think that's something that that every parent can pray. And I know I'm going off track a little bit here and doing a little rambling, but when my wife and I, when we were pregnant with our first child, and side note, like saying we were pregnant, she was pregnant, I wasn't pregnant, but I know a lot of people say we, both people, whatever. That's just, anyway. So, so when we were expecting our first child during that pregnancy, we developed this prayer because you're uncertain about what's going to happen. There's a lot of complications that can happen with pregnancy. There's a lot of things that can happen in the recovery of pregnancy or recovery of delivery or, just in life. But I think if you can just put that trust in God, then I think that takes that weight off your shoulders, to pray for everything to be correct. Well, it's only correct in as much as it is giving glory to God. And so that would be to be the saint. And unfortunately, I've had a lot of people in my life who have passed away, and my prayer for them as well is just that they become what God created them to be and they accomplish the mission that God put them on earth to accomplish. So you have a mission. I have a mission. We've been put at this time in history for a reason. And so let's be those people that God thought of when he thought of you and when he thought of me. So that's a little bit about why I'm starting this podcast. That's a little bit about why, who it's aimed towards. It's aimed towards everybody, but it's specifically aimed towards my children and my family. And, we're going to just address the things that we can address, but we're also not just going to foment about culture. We're not just going to talk about ideas, although those are important things, I think, to some degree, but we're also going to hopefully be inspired to action. I don't think it's very productive to just sit around and talk about Catholicism. I think Catholicism is a contact sport. It's an applied science. When I taught theology in a high school, I would always say, theology is a contact sport. It's an applied science. You have to go out and do what it commands you to do. You have to live your life in a certain way. You have to understand that if you believe what Jesus Christ said, then there's certain demands that are put upon you. And that's when it becomes fun. That's not when it becomes arduous. That's actually when it becomes fun, is when you get to go out there and you get to experiment. You get to fall in love and truly know what love means. You get to, fight the battles that need to be fought and all the things that the saints have done throughout the ages. Because, it's your turn. It's my turn. This is our turn to experience God's grace and then go and move mountains. And so that's what we're here to do, is to let that grace flow through us into the world, that we would sanctify it in Christ's name. And what a cool task, and what a cool task. And the secret behind all that is that that's actually what we want to do anyways. We're all searching for happiness. We're all searching for love and fulfillment, and that's where ultimate happiness and love and fulfillment will come, is when we're on that mission. And so, we'll talk about that in some upcoming episodes, I'm sure, because that's really what I'm very passionate about and want to inspire people to do. So let's talk about what we're going to be talking about today, which is relativism. So in front of me on my computer here, I have a homily, and this homily is written by then Cardinal Ratzinger, who would become Pope Benedict XVI. And what he says in this homily, I believe this is from 2005. So this is Monday, April 18th, 2005. And he gives this homily, and I think it's one of the last homilies before he became Pope. I think I read that somewhere. But he gives this homily, and what he says in it is, I think, very prophetic. He talks about the times that we're living in. And he talks about the dictatorship of relativism. Now, if you know anything about relativism, it is that it is everywhere. It is everywhere. The idea that truth is not objective, but that it is subjective to the individual, that is relative to each individual, is something that people just take for granted in our society nowadays. So for instance, if you say something like, you do you, or do whatever makes you happy, or you can believe that, but I'm going to believe this. Or you might think that that is true for you, but it's not true for me. Right? Have you heard those things before? Because if you've heard those things before, those are relativist statements. They're not statements that are grounded in an objective truth, in an objective reality. Instead, what they are statements that just say, well, what's good for you might not be good for me. And, your truth is not the same as my truth. And so just let me do my thing and you go do your thing and somehow we'll all be happy as, whatever. That's a really harmful idea to take, because a really harmful philosophy to have, because it doesn't ground itself in what is real. It doesn't ground itself in what is true. And when God created everything, he created it with the intelligibility to understand it. And so, this cup is a cup. I mean, there it is, right? We see the cup, we acknowledge it as a cup. But some people might argue that. They might say, well, maybe it's a cup for you, or it's just because you perceive it as a cup. It doesn't mean it's actually a cup. And I know that sounds very goofy, but I think you can see examples of this in a lot of places. So one of them for me is marriage. You see this very often, that people will be confused about marriage, and they'll say, well, marriage might mean something to you, but it means something totally different to me. And so you might, or how to live a good life. They might say, well, you can live a good life, and you might think that good means this, but for me, good means this. And I'll never forget that when I was teaching in a public school, I was teaching a geography class, and they were talking about different cultures around the world. And the thing that, in this particular school district, what they would do is they would give you slides that you would, PowerPoint slides, and you put them on the board, and this is exactly what you were supposed to teach and exactly what you're supposed to say, and just go down the bullets and blah, blah, blah. It was horrible. It took all the life and the art out of teaching. But the one thing that it said on this one particular day, and this was the day that I knew I didn't want to go back to this particular school, was it said that the objective of this course is the objective of this course is cultural relativism. The idea that there's no culture that is better than another culture. Now, that might sound controversial to be like, well, Ryan, why are you saying that we have to be tolerant of all cultures? Well, no, we don't. We don't have to be tolerant of all cultures. We should only be tolerant of cultures that are good. We should only be tolerant of things in cultures that are good. We should not be tolerant of bad things. You look at maybe the Southern plantation culture and slavery. Right? Why would we don't say that is just as good as a free culture where there's no slavery, right? We wouldn't say that. We wouldn't say that a communist culture, with its authoritarian government or a totalitarian government or any of these, we wouldn't say that these are good and just as good as any other culture. Cultural relativism is not something that we ought to push for, and we certainly ought not to impress upon our kids. We ought to teach them exactly what is good, exactly what is true and beautiful, and hold that as the standard by which we judge all the cultures. And where cultures are bad, let's say genocide comes into mind, right? Where cultures are bad and they promote things that are evil, we ought to fight against that. And so there is a hierarchy of cultures, if you will, or at least there are better cultures than other cultures. And so this was something that I had to teach in public school, and it was just, as soon as I saw that on the slides, I told my classes, I said, I totally disagree with this. For the purpose of the test, because I had to give the same test as everyone else, so I said, for the purpose of the test, this is going to be the answer, because that's what you guys need to get an A. But to be a good person, you need to understand that relativism is a bad thing. And there is a correct way to live one's life. There are objective standards of what is good. And And then I just wasn't back the next year because I didn't want to have to teach that again. So anyway, this is the relativism that we live within today. And so Pope Benedict brings this up here in this address. And let me just read a few paragraphs to you and what he says here. Again, I'll put the links wherever I can find a place to put these links. But let's just look at this. It says, "Let us dwell on only 2 points. The first is the journey towards the maturity of Christ," as the Italian text says, simplifying it slightly. No, let me just say that. So let us dwell on only 2 points. The first is the journey towards the maturity of Christ, as the Italian text says, simplifying it slightly. More precisely, in accordance with the Greek text, we should speak of the measure of the fullness of Christ, what we are called to attain if we are to be true adults in the faith. We must not remain children in faith, in the condition of minors. And what does it mean to be a children in faith? St. Paul answers this. He says it means being tossed here and there, carried about by every wind of doctrine. That's from Ephesians 4, verse 14. This description is very timely, he says, with an exclamation point. So just that first paragraph, he's talking about what does it mean to be a mature Catholic? To be a mature Catholic, it means to not be immature, to not be a child. And what St. Paul clarifies that to mean in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14, is that we're not tossed here and there by every doctrine that comes our way. Oh, you think this is good now today? Well, I'll go do this today. And then, tomorrow something else is good, so we'll go over there and do that. Or, this is believed as good today, so we'll have that. And then, tomorrow this is believed as good, so we'll do that. Right? Today, marriage means something over here, and then tomorrow it means something over here. Whatever it might be. And so this is what St. Paul says, and Cardinal Ratzinger, then Pope Emeritus, or, Emeritus. You've got all these different titles for him, I suppose. But Pope Benedict XVI says as well, is that we can't be people that are tossed here and there just by everybody's different doctrine of the day, different fad of the day. Instead, we must be people that are mature, that are grounded in the truth, the objective truth about reality and about God. And he goes on to say, how many winds of doctrine have we known in this recent decades? How many ideological currents? How many ways of thinking? The small boat of the thought of many Christians has often been tossed about by these waves, flung from one extreme to another, from Marxism to liberalism, even to libertinism, from collectivism to radical individualism, from atheism to a vague religious mysticism, from agnosticism to syncretism, and so forth. Every day, new sects spring up, and what St. Paul says about human deception and the trickery that strives to entice people into error comes true. So we have all of these different isms that spring up throughout history, and today we believe this, and tomorrow we believe that. And what is actually true? And I think a lot of people today, and this is me talking now for those that are just listening, and now I think today a lot of people look at that and they say, there's so many different beliefs out there. How can any one of them be true? Well, there you have your relativism, right? There are so many different beliefs out there. How can any one of them be true? Well, do the intellectual heavy lifting of looking into as many as you can and arrive at truth. I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said something to the effect of, having an open mind. You can have an open mind, and that's great, but you have at some point have to close it on something, right? To close it on some truth. So look into all of these isms as they arrive. Look into Marxism, look into liberalism or libertinism, but then hold them up against the standard that Christ gives us of what is true. And then say, okay, these are false doctrines. These are not based in truth. These are not things that are going to help people lead a full and happy and fulfilled life. Grow up, right? As St. Paul would say, grow up. Don't just be children in your faith. Grow up and be adults in your faith, mature in Christ. And so here in this next paragraph, He says it. He says, today, having a clear faith based on the creed of the church is often labeled as fundamentalism, whereas relativism, that is, letting oneself be tossed here and there, carried about by every wind of doctrine, seems the only attitude that can cope with modern times. We are building a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definite or does not recognize anything as definitive, and whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and one's own desire. Right? And then that is the problem. Right? That is the problem. Our egos take over, and we create prisons for ourselves. Right? If you look at society today, you could say, like, are we better off than we were in the past? And some people might say, yes, we have all of these, things, blah, blah, blah. But look at, I don't want to go on and on about it, but just look at any measurable statistic of American culture in the last 50 years, and you can see a decline in things like morals and ethics and values and traditions. And it just seems like we live in this relativist prison that we construct for ourselves, and we think we're happy, but we're miserable. We've got so many people on, antidepressants. We have so many people that are addicted to things like alcohol or pornography. We have so many people that are miserable in their marriages and their relationships. We have so many teenagers that are suicidal. We have so many of these problems, and they're of our own making. Now, the Judeo-Christian anthropology would say, well, yeah, it's because we're fallen, because we're human and we're fallen. And we need to recognize that. This idea that we can get ourselves out of this is not a Catholic belief. And so we need Christ, we need grace to be able to get out of this. All right. Now, that's the dictatorship of relativism. But I want to show you again. Let's just put a bow on this real quick. So this is Benedict the 16th, then Cardinal Ratzinger, talking about how we have this dictatorship of relativism in the world, and we need to overcome that. And how do we overcome that? We overcome that by recognizing truth, right? Recognizing objective reality. And maybe that's a topic that we'll get more into in other shows about what is objective reality and those sort of things. But just know that there is truth out there. Right? There is truth out there. And it's our job to go and recognize that truth. Now, Duke University kind of proves my point for me. So what I did is I just brought up, it is an issue of, I believe it's a journal called Common Knowledge, and it's by Duke University Press, and I don't have a year, 2007, so it was published in 2007, and there's a title here. It says, A Dictatorship of Relativism, ? Symposium in response to Cardinal Ratzinger's last homily. So I'm just going to read just a little bit of a synopsis about this journal. I'm just finding this online at dukeupress.edu. And I want to just show you how this relativist idea is self-defeating. Right? It's just not true. It's a fallacy, okay, when you look at exactly what is going on. So let's look at this synopsis here of it, this summary of this issue. And this is put out again by Common Knowledge in 2007. I believe it's a journal. And what they're doing is they're responding to what Pope Benedict said in that homily. So it says here in the synopsis, it says, in the last homily he gave before becoming Pope Benedict XVI, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger described modern life as ruled by a dictatorship of relativism, which does not recognize anything as definitive, and whose ultimate goal consists solely of satisfying the desires of one's own ego. An eminent scholar familiar with the centuries-old debate over relativism, Ratzinger chose to oversimplify or even caricature the philosophical approach of great sophistication and antiquity. Okay, so they're saying that Ratzinger oversimplified things, even painting a caricature of this philosophical approach that has great roots in antiquity. Not like Aristotelian, epistemology is not something that comes from antiquity either, right? It's just like, no, skepticism and relativism, these are the great and sophisticated things of antiquity. But anyway, I digress. So it goes on to say, his homily depicts the relativist as someone blown about by every wind of doctrine, whereas the relativist sticks firmly to one argument. So this is the journal talking here, and this is the key. So I'll say this again. This is his homily depicts the relativist as someone blown about, quote, by every wind of doctrine, end quote. Whereas the relativist sticks firmly to one argument, that human knowledge is not absolute. So the relativist sticks firmly to one argument, that human knowledge is not absolute. So I just read that, and I'm going to reread that again here in a second, but I say that because it's very significant that a relativist would argue that human knowledge is not absolute, meaning that there's no such thing as absolute objective truth. But do you see the problem there? The problem is that when you say that there's no such thing as truth, you've just created a statement that you're saying is true. And so when you say that human knowledge is not absolute, like that's what the relativists say, the relativists champion that human knowledge is not absolute, that there's no such thing as absolute truth. However, by saying that, you're affirming that there is a such thing as absolute truth. It's what you say that is true. And so to fall into this trap about relativism, where you say that there's no such thing as truth, and yet you're saying a truth as you say that, right? That is something that for some reason our society has fallen into. We're willing to say that there's no such thing as a definition of love, an objective truth behind love, yet we're all searching for it and we all recognize it. We're not willing to say that things that we've agreed upon for so many thousands of years are true. Instead, we're making them relative and up to the individual. But that's really where we get into problems with that. Because, for reasons we'll get into in other episodes, you shouldn't even talk to someone else if you don't think they have anything true to say to you. If the whole world is up to your own interpretation of the whole world, then that other person can't share your interpretation of the whole world, right? You wouldn't go and comment about how beautiful the tree is if that person over there in their own relativist world that you believe them to be in can't look at that tree and see the same thing as you, because truth is not. Okay, we're back, and I don't really know exactly where I left off, but the camera went down. But I'm not going to let that stop me from publishing this video and this podcast today. So I'm going to keep going, hopefully pick up at a point where it's still valuable to whoever's listening. So coming to the end here, though, but just wanted to, again, reaffirm that this idea that there's no such thing as truth is really not an argument, because when you say that there's no such thing as truth, you're creating a truth in itself and therefore defeating your argument altogether. So we know that there's a such thing as truth out there. And now it's just up to us to go and to explore what that is. And, spoiler alert, Jesus Christ comes and he says that I am the way, the truth, and the light. Right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so that truth, that's very important. All right. Now, that's all I have for this little podcast episode. I hope that it was okay. I hope that you made it this far. If you made it this far, that's wonderful. Please, hit a like button or subscribe if you think it's valuable and want some, to see some more of this stuff or listen to some more of this stuff. And again, hopefully, maybe if you made it this far and you didn't get anything out of it, stop back in a few episodes and hopefully we've gotten a little bit better and those sort of things. But man, it's just important. Whatever it is that you want to do, just start. If you want to start a podcast, go start a podcast. If you want to start a YouTube video, start a YouTube video. If you want to start a school, go start a school. But we only get one life. Right? We only get one life, and so let's be the saints that God created us to be. God bless, and we'll see you later.